From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla Gonzalez. This is From the South. Algerian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika has reportedly agreed to hand over power to a new elected president. During a visit to Russia, Algeria's deputy prime minister alluded that the opposition will also be allowed to take part in overseeing the elections. He said the government has responded to the legitimate demands of the Algerian people. Weeks of anti-government protests have swept the streets of Algiers, calling on Bouteflika to step down.
The Algerian government sees that the upcoming presidential elections will take place under a new constitution. This election will be organized by an independent National Electoral Commission, the first time in the history of Algeria. Moreover, the opposition will be given way to join the government, which will oversee the upcoming presidential electoral process.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has warned of difficult days ahead as mass power cuts continue crippling the country. The country has been reeling from rolling blackouts for the past 3 days, caused by utility company Eskom's scarce resources and partially as a result of the recent cyclone that hit Mozambique. According to officials, the way forward is finding a reliable supplier to maintain the existing power goals. And the president of Mozambique fears that the death toll from Cyclone Idai could exceed 1,000 victims, as South Africa has announced it is sending troops to help with recovery efforts. The tropical storm has damaged 90% of the southern city of Beira. A dam burst on Sunday, cutting off the last road remaining to the city of about 500,000 people. According to the Red Cross and the Red Crescent Federation, at least 180 people died in Mozambique, Malawi, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. Thousands of people marched in Colombia to protest against the president's call to revise the peace agreements signed with former FARC combatants. Protesters rejected Ivan Duque's intention to modify 6 out of 159 articles in a law that would aid in implementing the 2016 peace agreement. During the rally, thousands chanted their support for the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, the governmental body created to implement the accords. The Special Jurisdiction has already established a court to investigate war crimes committed during the conflict, but it has been heavily criticized by Duque for allegedly being too weak.
This is a march of hope, to guarantee truth, justice, and to close off any possibility of impunity. That's what we're doing today, accompanying the JEP, and above all, we're certifying that it's an instrument of justice.
We are not going to allow this opportunity to be taken away from us. As a generation, we have a chance to live in a country in peace. We do not want other generations to live through an armed conflict.
And similar protests in Bogotá expressed their support for the indigenous and Afro-descendant community who are mobilizing in the southwest. They had blocked a major highway following a week of protests against the government of Duque. They demand that the president engage in constructive conversations with social and indigenous organizations who say he has breached previous agreements regarding their lands. Following the countrywide power outage in Venezuela last week, the schools have now returned to normal.
Venezuela continues on its way, but without lowering the guard on the face of unsettling, imperialistic plans which the Venezuelan government condemns. After many days in the dark due to a sabotage on the power grid planned from the outside, citizens are returning to their normal lives.
We are going about our daily routines. We sing the national anthem in the morning. Classes go as planned. We've actually seen an increased number of students recently.
Children return to class, and from there, they express their many emotions. They show that despite the obstacles, resistance and a will for moving forward are a part of the Venezuelan people.
We implemented a new dynamic to see how this last week went, and it wasn't as catastrophic as you may think. The children made candles and they had the opportunity to spend time with their parents. They saw that family union can solve a lot of problems.
In the middle of this, teachers highlight that the country quickly overcame limitations suffered in the last few days.
We usually see 900 to 1,000 students daily, 500 in the morning, 500 in the afternoon. Today, 90% of those children came. That means the country is already going back to normal.
A country facing an international siege has not stopped. Citizens show that perseverance is the main tool to move forward, without losing track of the threats from Donald Trump's administration, which continues to strangle Venezuela's economy with inhumane sanctions.
Last week, a delegation visited Venezuela, organized by the U.S. Peace Council and the Committee for International Solidarity in Venezuela. To find out more about the situation in the Caribbean nation, we were joined by Miguel Figueroa, the president of the Canadian Peace Congress, who was part of the delegation.
So to be able to go there and see firsthand what the situation is, certainly reinforced our impression that there is not a humanitarian crisis there. There are difficulties for sure. Clearly, the impact of the sanctions and, needless to say, the long-term impact of the low oil prices, all of these have affected and impacted on government revenues and so on. But the fact remains that the people remain stoic, resilient, and I would say increasingly defiant of what they now see is not some sort of genuine concern for their welfare, but rather a pretext for intervention, a pretext for even possible aggression and war.
On Monday, representatives of Venezuelan opposition lawmaker Juan Guaidó illegally forced their way into 3 of the country's diplomatic properties in the United States. Guaidó's envoy says they occupied 2 buildings in Washington and 1 in New York. The Venezuelan government has condemned these actions, calling on the U.S. to respect international law. And the People's Forum, an incubator for social movements in New York, immediately responded, issuing a call-out for protests against U.S. intervention. The People's Forum says that this is another aggression in the long list of attacks against the Bolivarian revolution. Now here's what those demonstrators had to say about why the rapid response was so important.
Banks using their power financially to take the money from Venezuela and literally directly take food out of Venezuelan mouths and take supplies and necessary materials out of from the people's hands, right? And let's talk about how the Maduro government, everything they've been able to do for the people, everything the Bolivarian revolution has been able to do for the people. $7 billion are being stolen from the Venezuelan people by the U.S. government every year. They're strangling the Venezuelan economy just like they did in Chile in 1973 and just like they've done throughout history. Let us find out the truth.
The president of Cuba has condemned threats leveled against the life of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro by a retired U.S. general. Former General Anthony Tata was speaking on right-wing U.S. channel Fox News. The statement is a further example of U.S. hostility against Venezuela. President Díaz-Canel said that the declaration was unacceptable against the leader of a sovereign country. Workers of Ecuadorian company Furukawa Plantaciones are denouncing labor exploitation and abuse. A recent ombudsman's report concluded that their case is one of modern slavery. Our correspondent Denise Herrera has the details.
The Furukawa company was founded in 1963. Its main activity is the cultivation of abaca and other textile fiber plants. One of its slogans is to develop the company and care for the employees' well-being. But a recent report from the Ombudsman's office revealed serious workers' rights violations, such as Walter, one of the complaints employees who has been working 25 years in the company.
Before the situation that we are now facing, we all met and we discussed what we have been going through and how we could recover something from our work. We have lived without insurance or a fair wage. There was nothing for us.
According to the Ombudsman's report, the Furukawa company has violated the human rights of its workers for 56 years, most of them native people, just like Irene, who is a mother of 3 and is one of the hundreds of workers who for the first time are standing up for their rights.
We feel bad because we do not have any benefits. As you can see, we have to work under that scorching sun because this company does not give us anything. We have asked them if they will give us gloves to work with, but they didn't. We have to pay for all the basic materials for work.
Nosotros mismos a veces tenemos que comprar para este trabajo.
José Rodríguez is the tenant of one of the lands where the company operates in Santo Domingo in the Ecuadorian coast, and he is demanding a settlement for his work.
We are tenants, and we are treated as workers. For us, the pay of $640 does not get us anything. We have to pay for the tools. If a donkey dies, we have to find another. If a machine is damaged, we have to fix it. We have to pay for everything here.
Ecuador's constitution prohibits slavery and labor exploitation in all forms. A member of the Ombudsman's office points out that in this case, several departments of the state have a responsibility to take action.
The issue of housing is one of the problems because people do not have a place to live in. Conditions are inhumane. Families are living in small spaces. There is a responsibility from the Agriculture Ministry to award land to landless farmers. We have recommended that if we're going to deliver land, we have to implement a housing plan as well. And on the other hand, there's a responsibility of the Labor Ministry. How has it allowed a company to operate for 56 years when during one of its visits it found over 31 violations?
In the same way, the representative of the Ombudsman's office denounces potentially similar cases around the country.
In the Ombudsman's office, no cases like these are registered, but we have been warned by other social organizations that, for example, similar cases are taking place with palmicultores in Esmeraldas and also with farmers in the Amazon.
Furthermore, the Ombudsman's report indicates that according to public information, the legal representative and secretary of the Directory of Furukawa is the Dr. Marcelo Cicerón Almeida, Minister of the Supreme Court of Justice, advisor of the Presidency and Ministry of Health, and honorary consul of the Kingdom of Norway since 2003. Denise Herrera, Telesur, Ecuador.
We have more stories coming up. We'll be back.
Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence promoted by imperialism. Get access to the analysis of the socio-economic and political life of the whole South America on our screen and platform in English. A critical place committed to the truth to determine the major events that transformed the world today. On Monday, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. The lower house in Haiti has voted to remove the Prime Minister Jean-Henri Séant. This comes just 6 months after Séant took office in the midst of a persistent economic and political crisis. 93 members of parliament voted in favor of the motion to sack Séant, while 6 voted against and 3 abstained. The Prime Minister did not attend the vote. He had expected to face a vote of no confidence in the Senate, but they did not reach quorum. Let's hear from our correspondent, Kendi Sidor in Port-au-Prince, who has more.
The Chamber of Deputies voted to remove the Prime Minister Jean-Henri Seyon during a special session, with 93 of 117 deputies voting to remove the Prime Minister. The session took place in his absence, because both chambers demanded his presence on the same day. There appears to be a conflict between the two chambers after the vote against the Prime Minister took place. He was in the Senate to argue against the decision to remove him from office. According to the PM, the session was invalid because he can't be in the two chambers simultaneously. The Senate was unable to finish its session because there are only 10 senators present, and normally the body functions with a minimum of 16 senators present. The parliamentary conflict goes on because the President of the Senate said the session will continue next Wednesday. That means the Senate continues to recognize the authority of Jean-Henri Seyon, despite the vote to dismiss him in the Chamber of Deputies. The vote to remove the Prime Minister 6 months after his ratification was expected, because he had been in conflict with the President, Jovenel Moïse. The President isn't satisfied with his work, especially with regard to a national dialogue. There are also people with the President who believe that the Prime Minister is looking to replace him. It's important to note that the majority of deputies and senators side with the President. It's impossible to say what's going to happen now, because the situation is completely new here.
Candice Isidore reporting from Port-au-Prince. Now to Nicaragua, the delegation representing the government in negotiations with the opposition has released a statement declaring its commitment to peaceful dialogue and questioning the attitude of the opposition. Through Foreign Minister Denis Moncada, the government rejected provocations of those at the negotiating table who incited altercations endangering public order last Saturday. The government asked for seriousness, sincerity and responsibility in order to reach positive agreements for all of Nicaragua. Gender rights have been at the center of political debates in Cuba, and at the heart of these discussions has been the National Center for Sex Education, led by Mariela Castro, the daughter of former President Raúl Castro.
This is one of the regular community fairs held by Cenesex, the National Center for Sex Education. This time, it's focusing on parenting, equal rights, and responsibilities for mothers and fathers. What role should men play in educating their children? How can they grow up with more independence? What are the limits? These are some of the questions up for debate at sessions like this, marked by creativity and humor.
We have seen that bringing up children is still seen as a very onerous task, especially for women. Many of them think they are overprotective, and that kind of dependence does not favor the development of the children as autonomous, cooperative, and participatory individuals.
This is one of the training sessions.
Ya llegué y ya me voy. Javier, espera un momento. Pon la mochila en su lugar y dime una cosa. ¿Se puede saber a dónde vas?
Here, the youngsters between 10 and 15 engage in video debates to discuss their relations with their parents, their families, and their friends.
What we aim to do here is talk about and identify the best ways for these boys and girls to confront the things that hurt them, to move on and develop new skills to be able to grow in a healthy, independent way. There is no one prescription, but a lot of things to think about.
The idea is to challenge traditional views of parenting, where it is the mothers who are supposed to care for the family at home while the fathers go out to provide sustenance. The experts here see this division of labor between men and women as a logic of exploitation, designed to reproduce the capitalist social order, one that still persists in Cuba and requires gradual changes by the revolution.
The point of this activity is to help our people overcome the patterns of dependency that came out of the later phases of capitalism, patterns that still produce a lot of dependency and are a means of dominating the population.
They say the aim is to make people aware of this, so that they can promote new kinds of subjectivity in a society that is itself still new, as here in Cuba.
In Argentina, the forensic specialist who said that public prosecutor Alberto Nisman was murdered, opposing claims that he committed suicide, has been found dead. Osvaldo Hugo Raffo was found dead in his house after reportedly being shot in the head. He was one of the strongest voices against the theory of Nisman's suicide. Alberto Nisman was in charge of investigating the attack against a Jewish center in Buenos Aires in 1994, which killed 85 people. He was found dead in 2015 after accusing the government at the time of covering those responsible for the attack. Former President of Peru, Alejandro Toledo, has been arrested in the U.S. for public intoxication. The former president has lived in the U.S. since 2017 as he awaits an extradition process to face bribery charges in Peru. U.S. authorities said Toledo was arrested on Monday for being drunk in a restaurant in California. He was released soon after. Peruvian prosecutors have accused Toledo of accepting a $20 million bribe from Brazilian company Odebrecht in exchange for a lucrative contract. Officials say the black boxes from the crashed Ethiopian Airlines flight show similarities to the Lion Air crash in Indonesia. According to Ethiopian Minister of Transport, at least one similarity is the length of time that the planes were in the air before crashing. In October, all 189 people on board Lion Air Flight 610 were killed when the flight went down over the Java Sea in Indonesia 13 minutes after takeoff.
It's been already indicated that there are similarities. Particular similarities will be explained and more details will come out at each stage. But there are indications that there are clear similarities, especially with the number of minutes they spent after takeoff. But with the news revelations, it is better to pose questions to relevant authorities, as I'm doing right now here.
The World Food Programme has stopped distributing food aid in Uganda after 3 people died and some 200 others became sick. The Ugandan International Red Cross and Red Crescent says cases of people with suspected food poisoning were reported on Saturday at Lotome Health Center in Napak, a day after food distribution began. The World Food Programme and the government of Uganda are still investigating the case. People have been warned not to eat the distributed food. We're taking one last break. Stay with us.
The life is full of moments. Moments of fight. Moments of hope. Moments that transcend. Moments that you can live in. Telesur documentaries. Sundays. Only on Telesur.
And we're back. Hundreds of people took to the streets of Sacramento, California in the United States, demanding justice for Stephon Clark, who was shot and killed by police 1 year ago. Protesters held banners and chanted Black Lives Matter, remembering the 22-year-old boy who was shot at least 7 times in his grandmother's backyard. The 2 officers responsible claimed Clark was armed, but later found out he was actually holding a mobile phone. The 2 officers were found not guilty by Sacramento County's district attorney on March 2nd.
There's an epidemic in the United States of police taking the lives of black men, not caring about it, sweeping under the rug, telling lies about us, and then slandering us when we're dead. It needs to stop.
The French Prime Minister has announced a ban on yellow vest protests in several districts of France if so-called extremists are present. President Emmanuel Macron has defended banning any form of gathering in places that have been greatly affected by the protests, including the Champs-Élysées in Paris. The prohibition will come into effect next Saturday. Yellow vest protests against the government began on November 2018 and have been ongoing since every weekend.
These announcements are not results of powerlessness, but a public order response to this reality, a horde of hooligans, which is different from a protest by free citizens. So to be precise, we are giving ourselves the power to apply a ban in certain zones. So yes, next Saturday, the Champs-Élysées, as other town centers, which have been particularly hard hit by the crisis, will be closed to any public gathering.
Following the mass shooting in Christchurch, New Zealand last Friday, a farmer has handed over his semi-automatic rifles to local authorities. John Hart has explained that the convenience of owning a gun is not worth the risk of another massacre occurring. New Zealand's Prime Minister is expected to announce new gun laws in the coming days.
The utility or convenience of a semi-automatic rifle weighed up against the possibility of another tragedy like we've witnessed in New Zealand is really not a difficult comparison at all. It's really not worth the risk to my mind.
Citizens in Thailand are gearing up ahead of the March 24 presidential election, the first in 8 years. These will also be the first general elections under the 2017 constitution, which has been criticized as consolidating the military's power. Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha was a former Royal Thai Army officer who led a military coup in 2014 against the previous PM.
I want to vote because we've gone a long time without an election.
I will vote for the party that will work for the country and make sacrifices for the people.
The death toll of a building collapse has risen to 15 in northern China's Xiangying County. Rescue operations are still underway. 5 people are still unaccounted for, while 13 have been rescued. The accident occurred when a landslide toppled 2 residential buildings, a makeshift house and a public bathhouse. With that, we end our news brief, but you can read more on these stories on our website, telesurenglish.net. And you can also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and also Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.